A 12-year-old boy disappeared during recess in 1994. 27 years later, a demolition crew found his orange jacket locked inside a sealed school basement. The staff called it a runaway. The cameras malfunctioned. But his mother never stopped asking questions. For nearly 3 decades, no one listened until the wall came down and revealed what the school tried to erase. It was an unusually warm afternoon in the small town of Windermere, Oregon. The sun filtered down through patches of lazy clouds, casting a golden haze over the playground of Windermere West Middle School. Laughter echoed across the blacktop as sneakers slapped against the pavement and the hollow thud of a soccer ball cut through the spring air. Among the students, one figure stood out, not because of his height or strength, but because of the vibrant orange jacket he wore, zipped all the way to his chin despite the unseasonal heat. His name was Elias Byrne. 12 years old, quiet, clever, and always had a habit of talking to himself when he played. 3 passes to the right, 2 touches, then go. His whisper followed each motion as he carefully dribbled the ball toward the rusted net at the far end of the court. Coach Denver stood with his clipboard under one arm, whistling now and then, but mostly letting the kids burn off steam. He wasn't a detail man, more interested in getting through the period than supervising every move. When Elias jogged up to him and whispered something, Denver just nodded. "Yeah, sure, go ahead. Just be quick," he muttered without even looking up from the attendance sheet. That was the last confirmed moment anyone saw Elias Byrne. He didn't come back. 10 minutes passed, then 15. Denver assumed the boy was stalling to skip laps, like a few others had tried before. It wasn't until the final whistle blew and the students lined up to return to class that someone realized Elias hadn't returned. "Coach, Elias is still in the restroom," one of the boys asked. Denver frowned, scanned the crowd, and muttered, "Probably got caught up staring at himself in the mirror." Still, something gnawed at him. By the time the school bell rang and kids flooded the halls, Monica Byrne was already pulling into the parking lot. A registered nurse at the local urgent care, she'd arranged to pick Elias up early for his dental appointment. When she didn't see him waiting near the office, she assumed he'd forgotten and was still in class. But when the front desk paged his home room, the response came back clipped. He left gym period for the bathroom and never came back. Panic started as a small seed in her chest. "Check the playground. Maybe he went back outside." The office assistant gave her a puzzled look. "There are cameras around the court. Let me check." They pulled up the grainy footage. It showed Elias jogging toward the coach, whispering something, then turning toward the far edge of the court, but the angle cut off before he reached the restroom building. The next file was corrupted. "What do you mean corrupted?" Monica asked sharply. "It just says, 'Data not found,'" the tech replied, adjusting his glasses. "It's weird. This usually doesn't happen." Monica's voice trembled. "Try another angle. Any camera, any timestamp." But nothing. There was no footage of Elias ever walking into the restroom, no footage of him leaving, just a 12-year-old boy in an orange jacket stepping out of frame and into thin air. The police were called. Monica's voice cracked as she repeated the same details to Officer Hernandez. The officer took notes carefully, but didn't seem overly concerned. "We'll issue a check with his known contacts. Sometimes kids just take off, you know?" Monica shook her head. "He's 12. He doesn't go anywhere without telling me. He's afraid of the dark. He double-checks the locks at night. He's not the kind of kid who runs away." The officer offered a tight smile, more for procedure than comfort. "We'll take a look around, ma'am." By sundown, the search had escalated. Local volunteers combed the surrounding woods. Teachers gave hesitant interviews. Students murmured in clusters about how Elias was acting a little weird lately, or had been staring at the old gym building a lot. But those were just ripples on the surface. The real question gnawed at everyone. How does a child vanish from school grounds in the middle of the day with no one noticing? That night, Monica sat in Elias's room, the faint scent of pencil shavings and fabric softener lingering in the air. His science trophy still sat on the shelf. A half-finished model spaceship lay across the desk. The orange jacket, his favorite, was gone. In its place was silence, deep and punishing. She opened his sketchpad, flipping past pages of spaceships and doodles until she landed on one that made her stomach drop. It was a rough drawing of the school's gym building, but unlike any normal sketch, a shadowy figure was drawn near the back entrance, almost hidden in the dark lines of a poorly lit hallway. Underneath, Elias had written one sentence in small black letters. "There's a door behind the door." That phrase haunted Monica for the rest of the night. She repeated it out loud, hoping it would make more sense, but it didn't. The next morning, she went back to the school and asked to see the area behind the old gym. "It's been sealed off since the flood back in '89, the janitor told her. "There's nothing back there but mold and rust." Monica wasn't convinced. She walked the perimeter herself, noting that the bricks on the far wall looked newer, too clean, like someone had recently patched them. She pressed her palm against the wall. It was cold, but something about it felt off, too smooth, like it was hiding something. In the days that followed, the story of Elias's disappearance began to fade from the front page. But not for Monica. Every hour that passed chipped away at the life she'd known. The police classified him as a possible runaway. The school returned to routine. But Monica didn't stop. She rewatched every second who had been in gym that day, and every night she returned to that sketch pad and stared at the words that refused to explain themselves. "There's a door behind the door." The morning after Elias disappeared, Monica sat in the kitchen staring at his untouched breakfast plate, the eggs now cold and stiff on the ceramic dish. The hum of the refrigerator was the only sound breaking the sound until a loud knock jolted her upright. It was Officer Hernandez again, this time with a clipboard and a forced expression of sympathy. He had come to collect more personal items of Elias for potential scent tracking, a worn hoodie, an old backpack, and whatever might carry his scent. As Monica gathered things from Elias's room, her hands trembled, brushing over the pages of his sketchpad one more time, but it was the lunchbox, now sitting silently on the hallway shoe bench, that caught her attention. She hadn't opened it since she packed it. She picked it up, flipped the latch, and found the half-eaten sandwich, a bruised apple, and underneath the napkin, a crumpled piece of notebook paper. Her fingers uncurled the note slowly, her breath catching as she read the uneven, shaky handwriting. "Don't trust Mr. Reeve." There was no name, no date, but the scrawl was rough and desperate, the kind of warning that didn't come from imagination. Monica froze, her eyes darting around the kitchen as if the walls might explain themselves. Mr. Reeve. Mr. Benjamin Reeve, the assistant guidance counselor who had only started working at Windermere West 2 months earlier. He was soft-spoken, always polite, but Monica remembered the way Elias used to shift uncomfortably when his name came up. "He gives me the creeps," Ellis once said in passing, but she had thought it was just one of those childish overreactions. Now, reading the note, those words returned with a darker resonance. She called the school immediately, demanding to speak to the principal. "Principal O'Malley isn't in yet," the secretary told her, "but I can schedule a meeting." Monica's voice tightened. "No, I need to speak to someone about Benjamin Reeve. My son left a note. He named him—" There was a pause, then a low, cautious response. "Mr. Reeves he's not here either. He submitted his resignation this morning, effective immediately." Monica blinked, gripping the counter with her free hand. "What do you mean, he resigned? Elias has been missing for less than 48 hours. The secretary's tone shifted to defensive. He cited personal reasons. It's not uncommon after stressful events. "Where is he now?" "I beef he left town." Monica didn't wait. She drove straight to the school, stormed past the front desk, and into the administrative wing, where she found the office empty, except for a custodian mopping the hall. "Do you know where Mr. Reeves' office was?" she asked. The man pointed silently to the last door on the right. She pushed it open. The room was bare, eerily so. The desk had been cleared out. No photos, no files, not even a stray pen. It was as though Reeve had never existed. She stood in the middle of the room, breathing shallowly, trying to piece together the invisible lines that were beginning to thread through her son's disappearances. Her instincts screamed louder than any official report. People don't flee their jobs mid-investigation unless they're hiding something. Monica took the crumpled note straight into Officer Hernandez. He held it in gloved hands, examining the writing, frowning slightly. "It's troubling, sure," he said slowly, "but it's not proof." Monica leaned forward. "Then what is?" My son named someone. That someone quit and ran 3 days later. You think that's just coincidence? Hernandez tapped the note against his clipboard. It could be unrelated, but I'll add it to the file. That phrase, add it to the file, ignited something bitter in Monica. She knew this would be buried unless she did more. Back at home, she pulled out the school directory, flipping past names and numbers until she found Benjamin Reeve. The phone number listed had been disconnected. She searched online, tracking his name through old teaching boards and forums, until she found a vague LinkedIn profile with a headshot that barely resembled the man she remembered. No activity, no new positions. It was like trying to follow footprints in the rain. She tried to call the school district, but was stonewalled with the usual language: privacy, protocol, policy. No one would confirm where he went. No one would say if he had ever been investigated before. All she got was an address on an old payroll document somewhere on the outskirts of Lincoln County. That night, Monica sat with the note again. She stared at each letter as though the spacing might reveal a deeper message. She thought about the jacket Elias had worn, that bright orange one, and the way the gym camera had gone out just as he walked out of frame. She thought about how the janitor said that part of the building had bad wiring but had no work orders filed. She thought about Elias's sketch of the shadowy figure, the door behind the door, and she kept thinking about Benjamin Reeve. The next day, Monica showed the note to Mrs. Paget, Elias's English teacher, someone he trusted. The older woman took one look and nodded solemnly. "That's Elias's handwriting," she confirmed. "I recognize it the way he does the R. It loops backward. I always corrected him for that." Monica felt a vindication that was brief but potent. It wasn't just a warning, it was a clue. She dug deeper. She began collecting whispers from parents who remembered strange comments their children had made about Mr. Reeve. A boy named Tyler told his mom that Mr. Reeve always wanted to talk in private, that he would pull kids into storage rooms for quiet sessions. But nothing was ever reported. No one wanted to accuse a school official. No one wanted to believe something sinister could grow in the sterile linoleum halls of. Monica wasn't afraid to believe it anymore. She compiled a timeline, pinpointing the days Mr. Reeve had pulled Elias out of class, cross-referencing it with her son's sketchpad entries. There was a pattern, and at the center of it, always, was the old gym wing. She returned to the school again, this time asking for building blueprints. She claimed it was for closure, that she wanted to understand where Elias might have gone. The clerk gave her a dusty folder, not questioning her sincerity. Late that night, with the blueprints spread out across the dining table, Monica traced her finger along the outer walls of the school. Then she found it, a maintenance corridor listed on older versions of the blueprint, now sealed and omitted in the recent map. The corridor connected directly from the old gym utility closet to a crawlspace that led underground. Her breath caught. The same area the janitor had once said was just for pipes. But Monica knew what to do. She didn't sleep that night. She spent it preparing, because if no one else would break that wall, she would. The next morning, Monica returned to Windermere West Middle School under the pretense of collecting a final batch of Elias's belongings from his locker. With the excuse in place, she wandered beyond the administration corridor, down the less-traveled hallway that ran parallel to the gymnasium. The hallway smelled faintly of dust and floor wax, an unsettling scent that seemed almost too sterile. She paused in front of the janitor's closet and studied the narrow side door directly adjacent, the one Elias had sketched in his notebook. It had a rusted latch, no signage, and a faded smudge on the floor that hinted at heavy foot traffic once having passed through there. Before she could press her hand to the knob, she heard footsteps behind her. A girl's voice broke the silence. "Are you Elias's mom?" Monica turned slowly, surprised by the soft, nervous tone. The girl, maybe 11 or 12, had a lanyard swinging from her neck and a backpack nearly as big as her. She fiddled with the strap anxiously. I think I saw him before he was gone, in the hallway near the basement steps. Mr. Reeve was with him." Monica's chest tightened. "What hallway?" she asked gently, stepping closer. The girl pointed toward the same door Monica had just been studying. "He looks scared," the girl added. Mr. Reeve had his hand on his shoulder. They were heading down to the reflection room. Monica froze. "What's the reflection room?" The girl looked confused, then whispered, "That's what the older kids call it. It's like a punishment place. There's no windows. They stopped using it after last year, I think. But I've heard stories. Some kids got sent there for talking back or skipping class. It's supposed to help you think about what you did. But nobody ever wanted to go." Monica knelt down, her voice scattered but urgent. "Nobody talks about it. They say the teachers pretend it doesn't exist." Monica felt a cold wave travel down her spine. "Thank you for telling me," she said softly. But the girl had already turned and slipped away, disappearing around the corner like a whisper in the air. Later that afternoon, Monica stormed into the main office with a sense of purpose that left no room for pleasantries. Principal O'Malley met her in the hallway, expression guarded. "Mary Byrne, I understand emotions are high, but I want to see the basement," she said, cutting him off. "The maintenance corridor behind the gym, the one that leads to the sealed hallway." O'Malley blinked, a brief flicker of something crossing his face, recognition or fear, she couldn't tell. "That part of the building was shut down years ago. Mold, water damage. It's not safe." "Was it shut down before or after my son disappeared?" Monica asked, her voice low and sharp. "Because I've spoken to a student who saw Mr. Reeve take Elias down there." O'Malley exhaled slowly, then crossed his arms. "We had no record of such an incident. Mr. Reeve's interactions with students were limited and appropriate." Monica stepped forward, refusing to flinch. "You sealed a hallway that was once used for student discipline, and you're telling me no one remembers it existing?" "I want to see it," O'Malley insisted. "The stairwell was filled with bricks 2 weeks ago. It's inaccessible. The decision was made by the district." Monica's mind reeled. 2 weeks, exactly the same amount of time since Elias vanished. Too neat, too fast. "Why now?" she asked. "Why seal it now?" "It was already scheduled. It had nothing to do with my son," she snapped. "It had everything to do with him, and you know it." The principal held her gaze but said nothing. Monica turned and walked out without waiting for a dismissal. That evening she returned to the house with fury vibrating through every muscle. She opened Elias's sketchbook again and flipped back to the drawing of the hallway. She hadn't noticed before, but in the top right corner, hidden behind a doodled vent, was a small series of lines resembling stairs and a square labeled R. Reflection room. She grabbed her phone and began calling every parent she could remember from Elias's class. Most were hesitant. A few were kind but said they didn't know anything. But one mother, a woman named Dana Riley, paused when Monica mentioned the basement. "I remember something," Dana said slowly. "Last year, my son Liam came home shaken after school, said he'd gotten detention in the dark room, and they made him sit for 2 hours without lights or a clock. I thought he was exaggerating, but he was pale for days." "Did you report it?" "I asked the school. They said it was a misunderstanding, that he must have been in a storage room by accident." Monica swallowed hard. "And you believed them?" Dana sighed. "I wanted to. Now, I'm not so sure." With renewed determination, Monica drove back to the school that night under the cover of darkness. She parked a block away and walked through the side gate she knew would be unlocked during janitorial hours. She crept around the back of the gym, flashlight in hand, the beams catching on flaking paint and rusted signage. When she reached the maintenance door, she found it sealed, just as O'Malley had said. Fresh brickwork filled the frame, mortar still pale and uneven. But what stopped her wasn't the wall. It was what lay beneath it. The faint smell of bleach, a set of muddy footprints leading away from the site, and a torn piece of caution tape flapping from a nearby vent cover. She returned the next day with a camera and documented everything. The bricks, the tape, the vent. She sent it to Officer Hernandez and demanded he reopen the search beneath the building. "I can't do that without a warrant," he told her. "The school district won't allow excavation without cause." "You want cause?" she snapped, attaching Elias's drawing to her next email. "Here's your map. Here's your witness. Here's your room." But she knew the police weren't going to move unless something undeniable forced their hand. So she decided to make noise. Public noise. That night, Monica went live on Facebook. She stood in front of the school holding Elias's orange jacket, the sketch pad, and the crumpled note. She told the story from start to now, leaving nothing out. She named Reeve, she named the reflection room, she showed the wall. Within an hour, the video had 10,000 views. By midnight, local journalists were calling her. By morning, the district office had issued a statement denying any knowledge of a punishment chamber, but photos of the brick wall were already circulating, and the community wasn't buying the official line. Monica barely had time to breathe when her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. It read, "Stop digging or you'll regret it." She stared at the message, her heart racing, and then immediately forwarded it to Hernandez. For the first time, even he seemed shaken. "That's a threat," he admitted. "Now we have reason to escalate." Monica didn't feel relief. She felt colder than ever. Because if they were willing to threaten her, it meant she was closer than she thought. And someone didn't want her to see what was behind that wall. The fallout from Monica's live stream was immediate and chaotic. The superintendent's office released a carefully worded press statement denying all knowledge of any reflection room and dismissed the allegations as internet sensationalism. They claimed the sealed hallway was simply a disused maintenance zone and that the timing of the brickwork's completion had been purely coincidental. But the community wasn't convinced. Parents who once stood on the sidelines now demanded answers. Yet just as the pressure began to mount, a strange silence settled over the entire investigation. Requests Monica had sent to the school district's record office, documented phone calls, employment history, teacher complaint logs, began returning with the same response. No records found. She had filed a formal FOIA request listing Benjamin Reeve and any disciplinary actions tied to his tenure. But within 2 weeks, she received a letter stating that Reeve's personnel file no longer exists in the district archive, followed by a vague footnote that it had likely been destroyed during a system migration in 2017. Monica wasn't buying it. She followed up by requesting student behavior reports from Elias's class year, looking for patterns or red flags, but those, too, were mysteriously unavailable. The school's internal records for 1994-1995 had, according to one official, experienced partial data loss due to water damage. When she pressed further, she was told that physical backups no longer existed, and the district no longer employed anyone from the archival team who managed those files. It was as if the entire year had been swept off the books. She contacted former faculty directly, but many were unwilling to speak, either because they couldn't remember or had moved out of state, or simply refused to return her calls. One retired librarian told her off the record that she vaguely remembered complaints filed by students about odd disciplinary actions, but was never shown anything concrete. Another whispered that Mr. Reeve had spent a lot of time walking the back halls, even when he had no reason to be there. Still, none of them would go on record. 3 years passed. Seasons came and went like chapters Monica couldn't close. Each anniversary of Elias's disappearance brought with it a swell of pain, but also a fierce determination not to forget, not to let others forget. She kept his room the same, his sketchpad preserved in a sealed envelope, his orange jacket hung behind her bedroom door, where she touched it each morning like a ritual. The search for truth became her full-time existence. She spoke at parent advocacy groups, pushed for education transparency legislation, and tried to make noise, but the further from the event she got, the more distant people became. By year 3, Windermere's interest had cooled, and the silence from the district hardened into a wall. Then one night, a letter arrived, no return address. The envelope was hand-drafted to E. Burns' mother. Monica opened it with trembling fingers and unfolded a single piece of lined notebook paper. The writing was rough, all caps, as if written by someone who hadn't held a pen in years. It read, "I worked at Windermere. I was a night guard. 1994. I heard knocking behind the old gun wall. Crying, I told the principal. Next day, I was fired. No reason. They said staff readjustment. I know what I heard. Check the brick seam." Near locker 353, Monica dropped the letter and sat back in her chair, her breath coming in short, stunned bursts. Someone else had heard it. She wasn't alone in her suspicions. Someone else had tried to speak and paid for it. The name wasn't signed, but Monica remembered a story buried in the archives of a local parent forum from years ago, an old post mentioning a security guard named Walt Yates who'd been let go suddenly in late 1994. She searched his name, found nothing on social media, but eventually traced a listing to a mobile home park 2 counties over. She drove out the next morning. The sun was barely up when she knocked on a dented aluminum door in the back row of a silent lot. A thin man in his 60s answered, his eyes bloodshot, his hands trembling slightly as he lit a cigarette. "You Monica?" he asked. She nodded. He stepped aside and let her in without another word. The living room smelled of ash and old carpet. On the coffee table were stacks of yellowed newspapers, a broken CB radio, and an old VHS tape labeled Windmere 94 Shift Logs. He pointed to the tape. "That's all I kept. They told me to destroy it when I left, but I didn't." "What did you hear?" she asked softly. "Tell me everything." Walt took a long drag and exhaled slowly. "It was late, past 10. I was making rounds and heard something, 3 knocks, like someone pounding from inside the wall, then crying. Real faint, like a kid trying to be brave but breaking down. I radioed it in, but nobody came. When I asked O'Malley about it the next day, he said I was hearing things. Told me to take the rest of the week off. Next Monday, I didn't have a job anymore." Monica stared at him. "Why now?" Walt shrugged. "I kept quiet for too long. I saw your video, figured it was time." She took the VHS tape and promised to digitize it. That night, she sat in her living room staring at a borrowed VCR as the grainy footage flickered on the screen. The video showed long shots of empty hallways, time-stamped and dated. At exactly 10:42 p.m. on April 6, 1994, the camera near the gym entrance jolted slightly, then went black for 2 seconds before recovering. Faint audio accompanied it. A pause, then 3 dull thuds, then a sob. Low, strained, and unmistakably human. Monica pressed pause and leaned forward. She rewound it, played it again. The sob wasn't a ghost or an echo. It was a child. Elias, she didn't cry. She didn't even breathe for several seconds. She pulled out her phone and began recording the footage off the screen. She sent it straight to Hernandez. This time, when he called back, he sounded shaken. "We need to talk. I'll be at your house in 20. The silence had finally cracked, and now something was seeping through. By the spring of 2021, Windsmere West Middle School had long since closed its doors for good. After years of declining enrollment, bad press, and structural decay, the district finally approved the demolition of the building to make way for a new municipal complex. The decision sparked minimal protest. Most locals had already forgotten the building's past, and those who remembered preferred not to speak of it. The lot was cordoned off, heavy machinery rolled in, and workers began stripping the school down to its bones. Monica, now grayer but still sharp-aimed and persistent, watched from a distance on the first day of demolition. She hadn't stepped foot near the building in years, but her connection to it had never truly broken. The moment she learned the site was being torn down, she reached out to every contact she had, asking, begging to be notified if anything unusual surfaced during the demolition process. 3 days into the job, a man named Daryl Kinney, a subcontractor with 30 years of demolition experience, was assigned to clear out debris from the lower basement. The floor hadn't been touched in decades, a maze of rusted lockers and water-stained cinder blocks. The air was thick with mildew and dust, and every step echoed like a memory. Daryl wasn't one to get sentimental, but something about that floor gave him chills. In the farthest corner, behind a row of crumbling lockers and near a bricked-over doorway that looked oddly newer than the rest, he found a tall, narrow storage locker wedged into the wall. It had a busted latch, but the door was sealed with a rusted padlock. Curious, and assuming it was just more junk, Daryl forced the lock open with a crowbar. The metal creaked, dust billowed, and then he stopped cold. Inside, curled at the base like it had been tossed in hastily and forgotten, was a faded orange jacket. He reached out, pulled it free, and shook it loose. The fabric was stiff, dirty, and mottled with age, but still intact. Across the inner collar, hand-stitched in black thread, were the letters E.B. Daryl didn't know the name, but something about the discovery felt too deliberate. He continued inspecting the locker and found, tucked behind a stack of mold-eaten notebooks, a single sheet of paper. It was yellowed and brittle, but the pencil lines were still visible. A drawing, childlike, uneven, showed a boy curled on the floor of a small room with jagged black lines surrounding him like prison bars. Above his head was a speech bubble containing just a few words. "I'm not afraid of the dark. "I'm afraid my mom won't find me." Darrell froze. He called his foreman. The foreman called the site supervisor. Within hours, word of the discovery reached City Hall, then the press, then inevitably, Monica. She was at home when her phone rang. It was Officer Hernandez, now several ranks higher, but still with the same weary tone. "Monica," he said softly, "I think we found something." She didn't speak. He continued. "They found a jacket, orange, initials match, and there's a drawing." Her knees gave out, and she sank onto the floor, phone still pressed to her ear. "Can I see it?" she asked through a whisper. "They're bringing it to the evidence lab now. But yes, you'll see it." 2 days later, Monica stood in a secure evidence room, the jacket placed carefully under a glass casing. Her hands trembled as she traced the letters in the collar. She didn't need the drawing to confirm it. She had stitched those initials herself the night before Elias's 12th birthday, knowing how often he lost his things at school. The thread she used had been too thick, the needle dull, but Elias had loved it. "It's like armor," he told her once, "in case I get lost." Monica had never forgotten that line, and now, after 27 years, it played again in her mind like a haunting refrain. She turned her attention to the drawing. The handwriting was unmistakably his, those backward R's, the tight spacing, the blunt pencil strokes. She pressed her hand to the glass and whispered, "I'm here, I found you." Hernandez stood back, respectfully silent, until she was ready to speak. "Do we know how it ended up there?" she asked. "We're not sure yet," he admitted, "but forensics found old scuff marks inside the locker, like someone had tried to push from the inside. We're testing the jacket for DNA, but initial tests suggest it hasn't been moved in decades." Monica requested a copy of the demolition report. The storage locker hadn't been listed in any of the building's blueprints. In fact, the entire section of the basement, where it was found, had been marked condemned for water damage since 1995. And yet, according to Darrell, the concrete sealing the brick wall behind the locker was smooth and new, poured less than 5 years ago. "Someone resealed this," he told her later in an interview. "Not back in the 90s, recently, like they didn't want anyone finding that locker." Monica took the drawing home and placed it on the table beside Elias's sketch pad. The styles matched, the fear in the image matched. She stared at both for hours, wondering how much time he'd spent trapped behind that wall. How many days had passed before someone decided he didn't matter? She opened her laptop and drafted a statement to local news. It was time to go public again. This time, she had more than suspicion, she had proof. Story exploded. Jacket found in school AUS, may belong to boy who vanished in 1994, the headlines read. Monica appeared on news stations, podcasts, radio interviews. She brought the sketch, the note, the photo of Elias wearing the same jacket in a family snack shot. The image went viral. People shared it across platforms, and for the first time in years, Winsmere remembered Elias Byrne. Within a week, a second envelope arrived at Monica's door. No return address. Inside was a single torn comic book page from a 1997 superhero series. A sticky note was attached. He liked this one. Used to read it when they let him out for 5 minutes. "I'm sorry." The handwriting was messy but deliberate. Monica pressed the paper to her chest, her body shaking. Someone else had seen him. Someone else had known. The authorities intensified their search around the demolished building. Cadaver dogs swept the perimeter. Later scanning was approved for the foundation. Monica waited every day at the site entrance, watching the dig teams inch closer to the place where her son had left that final message. And then, late one Thursday afternoon, the foreman approached with dirt on his boots and a strange look in his eyes. He held something in a sealed evidence bag. "We found another piece of drawing, ma'am," he said. Monica took the bag, turned it over, and saw another fragment of a child's sketch, a windowless room and a small clock with its hands scratched out. Underneath, barely visible, were more words in the same pencil. "Day 12. Still waiting. She'll come." Monica felt her knees buckle again, not from pain this time, but from something deeper, certainty. Elias had believed. Even in the dark, even when forgotten, he had believed. And now, maybe, someone else would remember too. In the quiet expanse of the Cascade Mountains, where pine needles blanket the forest floor and clouds often cling to the peaks like secrets, Jonah Wells moved through the morning mist with steady, purposeful strides. At 39, he was lean, weathered by years of mountain life, and carried the calm authority of Survive the Wilderness and himself. He worked as a wilderness responder for a private search and rescue outfit based out of northern Washington, a job he had taken instinctively years ago, drawn by something he couldn't name. Jonah didn't remember much of his childhood, just fragments, feelings, colors, but he remembered fear. A cold, suffocating kind of fear, and a woman's voice calling out from somewhere above him, just beyond a wall he couldn't break. He had long learned to tuck those memories away, letting the wilderness fill the hollow spaces of his past with new ones. But all of that began to change on a Thursday in early September, when a call came through about a stranded hiker near Devil's Ridge, someone reportedly trapped between a rock fall and a steep ledge. Jonah was first on the scene. The man he pulled up from the edge was shaken but not seriously injured, covered in dirt and bruises, clearly dehydrated but coherent. "Name's Jeremy Byrne," the hiker said, coughing as Jonah handed him a flask. "Thanks, man. You just saved my ass." Denard nodded, already checking vitals and watching for signs of concussion. "You out here alone?" "Yeah," Jeremy wheezed. "Stupid solo trip. I promised my cousin I'd visit some old family land, but I thought I'd hike first." "Dumb move." Jonah blinked. "Byrne?" he asked casually, glancing at the man's ID. "Any relation to Monica Byrne?" Jeremy looked up, surprised. "That's my aunt. You know her?" "No," Jonah said quickly, looking away. The name just sounded familiar. They hiked back slowly, Jeremy limping but joking through the pain. Jonah found himself oddly drawn to the man's mannerisms, the way he tilted his head when he laughed, the way he squinted into the trees. Something about him felt familiar. When they reached base camp, Jeremy sat on a cot and rolled up his pant leg to apply a cold compress, and as he did, Jeremy noticed something else. A faded scar on Jeremy's cap, shaped like a curved slash with a double knot. Jonah froze. He had the same scar in the same place, though he'd never known where it came from. He had asked doctors once, but no one could explain it. "That scar," Jonah said, his voice quieter than intended. "How'd you get it?" Jeremy glanced down. "Fell off a fence when I was 6. Barbed wire. My cousin had the same one. We were always getting into trouble." Jonah's heart began to race. "What was his name?" "Elias," Jeremy said without hesitation. "Elias Byrne. He went missing when I was little. I barely remember him, but my aunt, she never gave up." Jonah couldn't breathe for a second. He stood, turned away, his thoughts tumbling through him like loose gravel. Elias, the name bounced in his chest, the scar, the feeling. He excused himself, saying he needed to grab supplies. But in the quiet of the storage trailer, Jonah pulled up an old search article on his phone. Clear eyes, the jawline, the expression that hovered somewhere between distant and hopeful. He staggered back a step. He remembered something then, not a full scene, but a sound. 3 sharp knocks. Cold concrete. A tiny square window set in steel. And then a voice, calling through static and steel. "Elias, sweetheart? Are you in there?" A child's voice, his own voice, hoarse and terrified, whispering back. That night, Jonah didn't sleep. He pulled out a shoebox of old items he had carried since he was 17, when he was found by a rescue group wandering near the Idaho border with no memory of where he came from. A foster home had taken him in, given him the name Jonah because he didn't respond to anything else. Among the items in the box was a torn page from a comic book, carefully folded, with a scribbled note on the back that read, "This one's for when you feel stuck. Keep flying." He hadn't known what it meant, but now, holding it under the lamp, he realized the handwriting matched the one on the drawing found in the locker in Windmere. He returned to the bunkhouse and found Jeremy sitting by the fire pit, sipping tea wrapped in a wool blanket. Jonah sat beside him. "What if your cousin didn't die?" he asked. Jeremy blinked. "What?" "What if he forgot who he was?" Jeremy frowned, then slowly shook his head. "That's what Aunt Monica always believed. Even when everyone else stopped looking, she said she'd know, that one day she'd just—" Jonah turned to him, the firelight flickering across his features. "Describe him," he said. "What did she say about Elias?" Jeremy rubbed his temples. "She said he had a scar on his calf. He liked drawing space stuff, he hated soggy cereal, he always zipped his jacket all the way up, even in summer." Jonah exhaled. He stood, walked to his pack, pulled out a photo taken last year at a rescue training camp. In it, he was wearing a zipped-up orange jacket he'd found in a thrift store. He handed it to Jeremy. Jeremy stared at the photo, then back at Jonah. "No way," he said. "This." "You?" Jonah nodded slowly. "I think I'm him." "Jesus," Jeremy whispered, standing. "We need to call her." "Not yet," Jonah said quickly. "I need time. I need to be sure." But even as he said the words, fragments began to press through, memories that had once been locked away, now demanding to be felt. A cold chair, a room with no windows, counting to 100 over and over to stay calm, drawing on the wall with a broken pencil. A promise, whispered in the dark. "Mom will find me." He didn't know how long he had been trapped, or how he got out, only that one day a door opened, a man in a kitchen apron knelt beside him and whispered, "You didn't see me. Run." Jonah remembered crawling through dirt and wires, light stabbing his eyes, forest noises roaring in his ears, and then nothing. Blankness. Until now. Until Jeremy. Until the name, Elias, returned like a heartbeat rediscovered after flatlining. He stared at the fire, letting the silence speak for him. Jeremy didn't press. He simply sat beside him, knowing that the man he had met as Jonah Wells might be someone else entirely, someone long lost, someone who had survived the dark, not by escaping it, but by waiting quietly for the light to return. And now, at last, it had begun to flicker again. Jonah sat alone in the quiet of his cabin the next morning, staring at the sun-drenched mountains through the cracked window pane, his mind still spinning from the previous night's revelations. The name Elias clung to him like a ghost rediscovered, and each breath felt heavier under the weight of a life he couldn't remember yet, somehow always carried. Across the table, Jeremy typed rapidly into his phone, sending messages, coordinating something Jonah didn't ask about until he noticed the younger man holding a sealed plastic bag containing a used coffee stirrer Jonah had tossed earlier. "What's that?" Jeremy looked up slowly. "A sample. DNA. I need to know if this is real. So does she." "She?" Jonah echoed, though he already knew. Jeremy nodded. "Button and Monica. She deserves to know." Jonah closed his eyes, torn between fear and the ache of possibility. "What if I'm not him?" "Then we find out together," Jeremy said simply. "But if you are, then it means she's been right all along." 2 weeks later, Monica sat on the porch of her small home in Windermere, her hands clenched tightly around a manila envelope bearing the return address of a private genetics lab in Portland. She had not told anyone about the envelope's arrival. She waited until the sun began to dip behind the cedar trees, until the shadows stretched long and quiet across the street, until the house was silent except for the creak of old wood beneath her rocking chair. Then she opened it. The letter was brief but precise. DNA analysis confirmed a 99.98% probability of maternity match between Monica Byrne and one Jonah Wells. Monica read it twice, then a third time. Her breath hitched. She didn't cry, not immediately. Instead, she stood slowly, walked into the house, and pulled out an old photo album from the bookshelf. She flipped through pages of birthday parties, school plays, afternoons in the park, her fingers pausing on a photo of Elias at age 11, standing with his arms crossed, wearing that orange jacket, eyes squinting at the camera like the sun was too bright. Then she pressed the lab results beside the photo, laid her hand flat across them both, and whispered, "I told them. I told them you were still out there." Meanwhile, Jonah sat in a small clinic room in northern Washington, where a neuropsychologist carefully reviewed a scan of his brain, pointing to regions impacted by past trauma. "These are old," the doctor said gently, "but consistent with a concussion or prolonged stress-induced memory suppression. It's likely you suffered a head injury during childhood and, under extreme psychological duress, your brain compartmentalized everything. That, combined with long-term isolation, could explain your amnesia." Jonah didn't speak. He had always known something was missing, but never imagined the void was so large. "Is it permanent?" he asked. "Unlikely," the doctor replied. "You've already begun to recall fragments. With time, more may return." Jonah left the clinic and found Jeremy waiting in the parking lot with a duffel bag. "Where to now?" he asked. Jeremy stared at the road ahead, the mountains behind him, and the ache in his chest that had turned from confusion into clarity. Windsmere? They arrived in town under heavy clouds. The sky looked like it was trying to remember how to rain, holding the weight of a storm just behind the horizon. Monica had prepared for the moment countless times in her dreams, but when the old truck pulled into her driveway and the man stepped out, a man with her son's chin, her son's gait, her son's quiet eyes, she could only stand on the porch and grip the railing like it was the only thing keeping her upright. Jonah didn't speak at first. He walked slowly, each step echoing the years they'd lost, and stopped 2 feet in front of her. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out something small, something he had carried in silence for 27 years. A folded comic book page. He held it out. Monica took it with trembling hands, recognized the character on the cover, the same one she had taped to his lunchbox the week he vanished. On the back, in faded pencil, were the words, "Don't stop looking. I'll keep trying to remember." Monica didn't cry, not exactly. She inhaled sharply, pressed the page to her lips, and then reached out, wrapping her arms around the boy who was now a man, the stranger who had once been her son. Inside the house, the past wrapped itself around them like a quilt stitched from broken pieces. Monica showed him the drawings, the jacket in its glass case, the photos, the evidence boards she had refused to take down. Jonah, Elias, moved through the window and stared out at the sidewalk, his voice barely audible when he said, "There used to be a swing set here." Monica turned to him slowly. "Yes, we took it down after." "I remember the creaking," he whispered, "and the way the tree shadows moved across the yard. I used to pretend they were spaceships." The words hung in the air like a spell broken after decades. Later that evening they sat across from each other at the dinner table. Monica had made soup, the way she used to, and placed a folded napkin on his lap, the way she did when he was 12. Elias didn't speak for a while. Then, slowly, he began to piece together what he could. The room. The cold. The hunger. The shadows. The man's voice, strict, controlled. "Mr. Reeve." Then another voice, softer, hurried. "A woman. He can't stay down here. They're looking for him." He remembered a click, a door opening, hands pushing him into a service tunnel. Light, trees, running, a cabin, a man with a beard who didn't ask questions, a new name, a new start. "They told me I had no ID, no memory, that I must have been abandoned." "You were stolen," Monica said, her voice shaking. "You were hidden, and you survived." Elias nodded slowly, processing the truth like a bitter medicine. He glanced down at the bowl of soup, then at his mother, and for the first time in decades allowed himself to feel safe enough to say what he never could before. "I'm sorry it took so long." Upstairs, in what used to be his bedroom, Monica had kept everything the same. The comics, the trophies, the rocket ship lamp. Elias stepped inside and touched the wall, remembering the posters he had once taped there, the drawings he'd hidden under the bed, and then, in the corner, he found a small box filled with letters, each one addressed to Elias Byrne, each one opened. "I wrote you one every year," Monica said behind him, "just in case. I wanted you to have something from every version of me." Elias picked up a letter dated 2005, unfolded it, and read the first line. "Wherever you are, I hope you still love space." He smiled softly, not because it was sweet, but because it was true. He had never stopped looking up. In the weeks following Elias's return, Monica became a quiet storm of purpose. She no longer needed to search for her son, but she refused to stop searching for the truth. With renewed urgency, she began organizing every document, every photograph, every letter, and every report tied to Windermere West. Her kitchen table became a war room. Yellowed newspaper clippings lined the walls. Names of faculty members were cross-acked against yearbooks and payroll records. Yet the more she looked, the more she ran into bureaucratic walls. Public records were scrubbed clean. Personnel files from 1994 were still conveniently lost. Monica knew she needed someone who could dig deeper, someone who didn't answer to the district or the town. That's when she contacted Rachel Tran, an independent investigative journalist who had previously uncovered a scandal involving youth centers in Colorado. Rachel agreed to take on the story immediately. She flew in 3 days later, arriving with a hard drive full of templates, legal connections, and a nose for cover-ups. Her first step was unorthodox but effective. She posted anonymous requests on message boards frequented by retired school staff asking for information about Windermere's disciplinary practices. In the early 90s, the responses trickled in slowly, some vague, some useless, but 3 stood out. The first was from a former teacher's aide named Helen Grayson, who recalled seeing Mr. Reeve escort several students to the basement for reflection sessions, though she had always assumed it was part of school policy. She mentioned being asked not to discuss those sessions during staff meetings. The second came from a janitor named Ray Molina, who claimed he once unlocked the reflection room after hours to find it dark, cold, and filled with scratch marks along the concrete walls. He reported it to administration, but was told to focus on maintenance, not behavior. The third message, however, was most damning. It came from an unnamed staff member who admitted to filing a formal complaint against Mr. Reeve in March of 1994, after walking in on him shouting at a student behind a locked door. The complaint, they said, was buried without investigation. Rachel, sensing the pieces were finally aligning, began tracing the official channels. She filed an appeal with the Oregon Department of Education and managed to access archived internal memos that had been misfiled under an outdated legal code. What she found there made her hands go still. 3 separate internal complaints, each flagged in 1994, all naming Benjamin Reeve. One cited excessive use of isolation on students. Another mentioned verbal intimidation and unauthorized disciplinary methods. And the last stated explicitly that Reeve had taken children to a non-registered location on school grounds. None of the complaints had been followed up. All 3 bore the same rubber stamp status. Reviewed, no action required. Rachel printed the documents, scanned them, and forwarded them to Monica, who stared at the pages as if they might burn through her skin. She read each line again and again, her chest rising and falling in slow, heavy breaths. She wasn't shocked. She was validated. When Rachel presented the findings in her report to local media outlets, it was met with immediate backlash from both sides. Parents who once stayed silent began sharing hushed stories. Former students sent in anonymous messages about time spent in the dark room, where they were told to sit and think until they apologized or cried. Most had forgotten up to harsh discipline. Some had forgotten, others never could. The Windermere district tried once again to deny knowledge, but Rachel's documents were clear, time-stamped, and legally obtained. They couldn't deny the reflection room anymore. It was real. Digging further, Rachel tracked down an architect who had helped renovate Windermere West in the early 1990s. Over coffee, he confirmed something chilling. That basement wing wasn't always sealed, he said. It was sealed under the direction of Principal O'Malley just after spring break '94. They told me it was mold, but the work order wasn't standard. They reinforced the wall. No vents, no inspection, just a closure notice and payment. Lead the inspection? Rachel asked. The architect shrugged. O'Malley signed off himself, said it was internal. It raised flags, but back then, we didn't ask. Rachel pieced together a timeline. After Elias went missing, Reeve resigned. Within 10 days, the reflection room was sealed. The janitor, who had raised questions, was fired. Complaints were buried, and the principal quietly stepped down the following year with a full pension and a single damning picture. The school had known, or at least suspected, what Reeve had done. And instead of investigating, they had erased it, covered it up, buried it behind brick and bureaucracy. In the center of it all was Elias, the last boy ever taken to the reflection room, the one who never came back. Rachel visited him at Monica's house with the report in hand. Elias read it in silence, his fingers tight around the pages. "I remember pieces," he said slowly, "not everything," but he paused, then added, "I didn't know what I was supposed to learn." Monica reached over, taking his hand. "That you weren't broken," she said. "That he was." Rachel nodded. "We're going to publish this. All of it. Your story, the evidence, the names. You're not alone anymore." Elias didn't respond right away. He stood, walked to the front window, and stared out at the yard, the same one where he used to chase fireflies before bedtime. "Do you think anyone else is still out there?" he asked softly. "Someone who never spoke up?" Rachel answered without hesitation. "If they are, this might be what brings them forward." Ellis looked down at his hands that had once banged against cold walls, drawing frantic circles in pencil, clutched at his own knees while the dark crept in. "Then let's show them," he said. "Let's bring it all up to the light." And as Monica looked on, she saw in her son not just survival, but a resolve that hadn't existed before. A quiet fire burning at last. After Rachel's expose lit up the town and Elias's name returned to headlines across Oregon, Monica knew the world now recognized what she had never doubted, that her son was not a runaway, not a ghost, but a survivor. Yet even in the light of vindication, she made a conscious decision not to push Elias back into the mold of who he once was. She understood that memory did not return like a light switch, that identity, once fractured and rearranged, could not be demanded. It had to be rediscovered. So instead of asking Jonah to be Elias, she simply began to write him letters. Real letters, handwritten on the same floral stationery she had used since the 90s, folded carefully and left on the nightstand in his old room, where he now occasionally stayed during longer visits to Windermere. Each letter held a memory. Some were short, just a paragraph about how he once insisted on eating cereal with a fork to avoid too much milk, or how he'd called dandelions sun whispers. Others were long, full of emotion and detail, like the time he built a spaceship out of shoeboxes and demanded she call him Captain Burned for a week, or how he once fell asleep clutching a crayon drawing of the two of them on Mars under a blue sun. She never ended them with "come back" or "remember." She ended them simply with "I love you, no matter what you remember." At first, Elias didn't open them. He tucked them into a drawer unread, unsure if he had the right to engage with a past that felt like it belonged to someone else. He still carried the weight of being Jonah, 39, independent, forged by wilderness and solitude. But every time he passed that drawer, he felt the pull grow stronger. Until one night, just after midnight, he sat cross-legged on the floor, unfolded the first letter, and began to read. He stayed there for hours, moving from one envelope to the next, piecing together a mosaic of himself through her words. By dawn, he was crying, not in grief, but in recognition. The letters didn't demand that he return. They simply waited for him to remember that he never truly left. Days later, Elias ventured into the attic above Monica's garage, a space long untouched since the early 2000s. Dust swirled in the slanting sunlight, and the air was thick with the scent of cardboard and time. He opened an old plastic bin labeled Elias, aged 10-12, and found inside a stack of comic books, some store-bought, others handmade. His fingers trembled as he flipped through a faded folder and found his own drawings, crudely drawn panels of a superhero named who fought darkness with beams of light from his palms. On one page, Solar Kid stood in a cage, whispering to himself, "Mom will find me. She always does." The image hit him like a punch to the chest. He didn't remember drawing it, but he remembered feeling it. That belief, that desperate hope. The pages weren't just drawings, they were breadcrumbs left behind by the boy he used to be, hoping one day they'd lead him back to himself. He spent the next week immersed in those sketches, tracing the pencil lines like they were veins connecting past to present. Slowly, faces came into focus. The cafeteria lady with the kind eyes, the tall boy who used to share his gummy bears, the teacher who sang during roll call, and his mother's voice, always reading to him at night, narrating every panel of the comics as if she were voicing a grand adventure. One night, while staying over, Monica found him asleep on the floor of his childhood room, surrounded by his own drawings, a pen still clutched in his hand. He'd added a new panel to one of the old stories, Solar Kid flying home, arms open, with a silhouette of a woman waiting at the gate. No words, just a smile. From then on, Elias began to refer to himself as both names, Jonah and Elias, as if recognizing that both were real, both valid, both essential to who he had become. He legally reinstated his birth name, as Elias Jonah Byrne, but didn't discard the years he had lived under a different identity. "Jonah helped me survive," he told Monica one morning as they sipped tea on the porch. "But Elias is the one who waited, who believed you'd find him. I think it's time I let him live again." Monica didn't speak. She just reached over and placed her hand on his, a soft smile blooming through the lines of her face. "I never stopped seeing him," she whispered, "even when the world told me he was gone." In the weeks that followed, Elias began rejoining his past like a man learning a familiar melody after years of silence. He visited his old elementary school, now a community center, and left a folded note on the doorstep. "Still here, still flying." He returned to the comic shop downtown, where the new owner, barely 20, had never heard of his disappearance, but listened intently as Elias shared the story behind the sketch he donated, a replica of Solar Kid's return panel. And on a rainy Sunday afternoon, he brought a box of old drawings to Monica and sat with her at the kitchen table. Not as a victim, he said. He was a hero who got out. They started drafting panels together, laying out the arc of Solar Kid not as fantasy, but as memory given form. Page by page, Elias reimagined his life, what was lost, what was hidden, and what had endured. In every frame, the darkness was there, but it was never the end. There was always light breaking through. There was always a voice calling through the wall. And there was always a mother, waiting, unwavering. The night before Elias was set to give his first public talk, an event organized by the state's Victims of Institutional Trauma Alliance, he sat on the porch with Monica under a blanket of stars. The wind rustled through the trees, and for a moment neither spoke. Then Elias said, "I used to dream about a door that only opened from the outside. I'd bang on it, scream, cry, and then I'd wake up before it opened." Monica turned to him, her voice thick. "And now?" Elias looked at her, eyes steady. "Now I know who opened it." And as the stars blinked above them, quiet and distant but never lost, the name Exile finally felt like home again. The following autumn came quietly, as if the earth itself had paused to breathe after the long unraveling of buried truths. In Windermere, the trees blazed with color, shedding gold and copper leaves onto cracked sidewalks that once carried the echo of a young boy's footsteps, and now, years later, welcomed those same feet back, wiser, steadier, home. On the outskirts of town, just past the bend where the willow trees leaned like listening sentinels, Monica tended to her modest dog rescue shelter, a place she'd poured herself into during the years of silence, when searching for her son was the only thing that anchored her. The air was crisp that day, scented with pine and damp earth, and she sat on a folding chair beside the wire fence, and she sat on a folding chair beside the wire fence. A warm cup of tea in hand, watching the newest litter tumble in the grass. Her scarf, knitted in Elias's favorite shade of orange, caught the breeze. She didn't hear the footsteps at first, but she felt them, something in the way the dogs suddenly looked past her and went still, tails mid-wag, heads tilting toward the dirt road. She turned, and there he was. Elias stood by the gate, his backpack slung over one shoulder, his coat collar turned up against the wind. He didn't smile immediately. He just looked at her, eyes full and quiet, like the ocean after a storm. Monica rose slowly, the mug slipping from her hands into the soft earth, and she took a single step forward, then another, until her arms found his shoulders and his found her waist, and they folded into each other like pages of a book finally reunited after decades apart. No words passed between them for a full minute, just breath and tears, and the low whimper of a nearby pup who, sensing the gravity of the moment, pressed its muzzle to Monica's leg. Elias whispered, "I'm really here," and Monica, eyes closed against his shoulder, replied, "I always knew." The image of their embrace was captured by a local photographer who'd been visiting the shelter that day for a feature story on animal adoption. That photo, shared online with only the caption, "27 years, and she never stopped waiting," went viral within 48 hours. It wasn't long before media outlets, podcasts, and national broadcasts clamored for Elias's story, not just because he had returned, but because his survival held a mirror up to systems that had failed so many others. Elias, with Monica's unwavering support, agreed to share his experience publicly, but he refused to let it become spectacle. Instead, he framed it as a call to action. "I wasn't the only one," he said during his first interview. "And if we forget that, then all we've done is tell a sad story and moved on. I didn't survive to become a headline. I survived to be a door for someone else." That interview sparked not just conversation, but movement. Advocates began requesting records from other schools with sealed-off rooms. Parents came forward with questions about disciplinary spaces that had never been explained. Survivors of similar childhood traumas reached out, some for the first time, mistaking first misunderstanding for correction, of pain dismissed as misbehavior. Monica and Elias, overwhelmed by the responses but inspired by the momentum, knew they had to do more. Together, they founded the Open Door Initiative, a nonprofit organization dedicated to investigating unresolved child disappearances, advocating for policy changes in educational environments, and providing resources for families left in the dark. "The name was Elias's idea. It's what I wished for the most," he explained. "Not rescue, not revenge, just a door that someone would open." The Foundation's first act was to publish a comprehensive report detailing the Windermere West findings, along with an interactive database tracking unresolved cases with similar patterns. They organized community workshops, school district audits, and trauma recovery programs for survivors and their families. But perhaps their most meaningful project was a memorial garden, planted on the very grounds where Windermere West once stood. The district had agreed to donate the land after public pressure made any other option impossible. The garden was modest, stone paths, benches, wildflowers, but at its center stood a bronze sculpture of a child reaching toward a cracked wall, light spilling through the fracture. At the base of the statue were the words etched in Elias's own handwriting, "Mom will find me." On the garden's opening day, Monica stood before a small crowd of neighbors, educators, and survivors. She wore the same scarf she had the day Elias returned. Beside her, Elias adjusted the microphone, glanced at his notes, then looked out at the people gathered. "I am not here today because I was strong," he began. "I'm here because someone else refused to give up. My mother didn't move on. She moved forward, always forward, and because of that, I was never truly lost. This place isn't just a garden. It's a reminder. A reminder that silence can be broken. That missing doesn't mean forgotten. And that behind every closed door, there's someone waiting to be found." As applause rippled through the crowd, Monica reached over and took his hand. For the first time in decades, there was no need to ask, "What if?" There was only now. And now was enough. That evening, back at the shelter, Elias helped her feed the dogs, both of them laughing as a puppy tried to steal a bag of kibble twice its size. The sun dipped low, casting golden light across the yard, and Monica paused to take it all in. The scent of hay, the echo of laughter, the warmth of her son's presence beside her. She didn't think about the years lost, or the darkness they'd walked through. She thought only of the miracle before her. A child once hidden, a voice once silenced, a name once erased. All returned, all whole, all found. If this story moved you, make sure to like and subscribe for more true inspired narratives like this one. We're building a community that doesn't just listen, but remembers. Drop a comment and let us know what part of this story stayed with you the most, and where in the world are you watching from right now. Your thoughts matter, and your voice helps keep these stories alive.